Hello, my name is Bre'Iera, and I would like to welcome you back to my podcast, Transforming Energy. On today's topic, we will be discussing frustration. Surprisingly enough, I never considered frustration as an emotion, even though I was often frustrated with myself, life, or people around me. In primary school, they teach us the basic emotions such as anger, sadness, love, and so on. But what about frustration? And how to cope when frustrated besides just putting a student in timeout. Today we will define frustration as well as talk about coping mechanisms and to better manage frustration. I love this quote by Peter Schaefer, and it says, "I was an accomplice in my own frustration." And when you think about accomplice, when you hear that word, what first comes to mind for me is a crime. And I like his analogy because for so many years I was the victim and I was the perpetrator in my own feelings. And I allowed frustration to control my actions and how I perceive myself and how I perceive things around me, circumstances, rather than looking at them as an opportunity to learn and just seeing it as an experience in how I should better go about doing life. I looked at it as me always being the victim. Growing up, I learned how to react rather than to respond to stressors or stimuli or triggers. And one of the biggest triggers or stressors that I saw in my household was frustration. And so now I'm going on the path of being a student of how to better control my emotions and not letting my emotions control me. In doing so, I've just been on this journey of just going through the different cycles of emotions and how some of those low vibrating energies can affect one person's life. So what is frustration? Frustration is the feeling of being upset or annoyed, especially because of inability to change or achieve something. Now let that just soak in for a moment. How many of you have been frustrated because something did not go your way? Growing up, I was never able to change my circumstances because I didn't have the power or the insight to do so. And so I just had to follow along with my parents, even though I knew I was in a dysfunctional environment. I couldn't get myself out because I was a child, and my parents didn't understand that their frustration was pinned towards my siblings and I, and that frustration, ultimately later on turned into resentment. And I would often find myself harboring my feelings, aka the frustration that I was experiencing, to the point where it would just boil over and become rage. Sometimes I would just have a loud outburst. And whenever I let out that energy, I immediately felt better, because just think about a pressure cooker. And once that pressure builds up, you have to release that pressure, turn the valve so you can release that pressure in order for it to not explode. So for me, growing up, I was never able to express my emotions. And so when I did express it, eventually it was always in a negative way. And that could, for me, it was me overeating and then vomiting. I went through a small moment when I wasn't diagnosed as bulimic, but I would eat and then I would purge my food, or me harming myself by with physical harm, or simply just crying too much because I didn't have an outlet. So instead of being shown how to deal with frustration, I saw it in the form of anger and rage, which was abuse. hence why I would sometimes self-mutilate myself, or just the mental strain that I put on myself of not feeling like I was worthy of anything. The thing that I told myself a lot was I was a failure. That has always been a distant thought in my head, a repressed thought in my head. And sometimes not sometimes, all the time, whenever I was frustrated, that's when that ugly little demon would come up and say, look at you. You can never do anything right. Look at you. You're such a failure. And that's something that I constantly repeated to myself. So bad to the point last year I went through this moment of disappointment and frustration just due to life circumstances. Back in March of last year, I decided to move to Houston, Texas after visiting. And I've always, 2 years prior to that, I decided that I wanted to move to Houston, but I didn't know how it was going to happen. And I received a confirmation when I finally went out to visit Houston last year in March. And so I moved out to Houston. Everything was perfect. I couldn't have asked for it to be a better situation. I found the perfect place. I liked the area. The only thing that I was missing was a job. But I was hopeful because I had a lot of interviews set up prior to me moving out to Houston. And when I got out there, of course, I had even more interviews lined up. But as time went on and as the money started to get low, that frustration turned into disappointment because I wasn't getting what I thought I deserved. As I told myself, I spent so much time in school, so much effort trying to get good grades and to just finally get my bachelor's degree. And here it is, I was out trying to do the thing that I thought I needed to do, because before I was always told, well, you need a degree in such and such. And then once I got the degree, and it's just everyone was telling me no. And like I said, with every no, it just seemed like my self-esteem and my self-value just decreased more and more. I never had it before. I probably had it when I was younger, but over time, I lost it. Just the way that I was brought up, the things that were said to me, just internalizing that. And so I internalized that frustration as, once again, me being a failure. So as the money was getting low, I started to panic. And with me panicking and having that thought in the back of my head that I am a failure, or that I was a failure, shall I say, because I'm not a failure. And that right there just reminds me, you have to be careful of what it is that you say to yourself. You have to be careful of what it is that you allow people to say to you, because once a thought is in your head, your mind can just spin it and just turn it into something ugly. And I didn't see that my self-value wasn't wrapped up in that job. I didn't process or internalize that I was the person that was adding the value to that job. A person could have $1 million, but the money doesn't put value on the person. The person adds value to the money, because money can't spend itself. You have to spend that money. You are the owner of that money. And I didn't see me when I was going through the process of getting a job. I didn't see that did not, add value to me. I just saw it as, woe is me. Why am I not getting it? What's wrong with me? I'm such a failure. I'm such an idiot. Those are the things that I just told myself. And my ego just did not allow me to properly assess my circumstances. Just plain and simple, I was so wrapped up in myself and couldn't look outside of what it is that I was feeling. I didn't know anything about managing emotions. Didn't even have a clue that that was something that I needed to do. And just being so caught up in myself and not stopping to say, Bre'Iera, you are okay. Bre'Iera, you have a backup, because my backup was I'm an EMT. I have a license. And the only job that I did get while I was out in Houston was an EMS job. And I was so caught up in my ego and my pride that I did not see that as an opportunity to just simply pay my bills. I looked at it once again of me being a failure. That's why it's very important that we teach ourselves and people that are under us how to properly manage our emotions, so we will not react, so we can respond appropriately to what it is that we're facing, because every person will receive obstacles throughout this life. It doesn't matter if you're a rich man or a poor man, or you're in between, or this or that. It does not matter. We are all going to face things, and that is something that I simply did not understand about life. I just thought everything, once I go after something, it was going to be given to me. But that's not how life works. So you ask yourself, where does frustration come from? Frustration is an emotion that comes from being blocked from achieving an intended goal. So my goal when I went out to Houston was to just start a new life. But what I failed to comprehend is all that mess you have inside of you that you haven't dealt with. I received one of the biggest revelations the other day, and that revelation was the depression that I was experiencing was from repressed emotions, memories, and thoughts, and just being frustrated and disappointed in life. Whether it was myself, my parents, my upbringing, just those are the things that contributed to the depression. And once I stopped being the victim and saying and just affirming myself that you can do whatever it is you put your mind to. I've done it before. I've done it countless of times. But whenever I get frustrated, and my sister said this the best, and she said it to me, she was like, when you get frustrated, you don't see anything. Like, it's like you're in tunnel vision and you can't say anything to you. Nothing comes in. It's just like you're a brick wall. And she's absolutely right. I've experienced that. Has been my default for many years now. I just shut down when I get frustrated. So now I'm learning how to overcome frustration, because if I don't, I will continue to allow that emotion to control my actions. And I am the controller. I am the person that get to say what goes on in my life. So what are the internal sources of frustration? If you're not able to get what you want or what you set out to do, the disappointment and frustration you feel may be the outcome. And basically that's exactly what I just said. The reason why I kept making impulsive decisions, because I was disappointed and just not thinking properly about my situation. And due to this loss, you can lose your confidence, you can lose your self-esteem. And for me, I feel like I never had it really. And like I said before, I probably had it when I was younger, but I don't quite remember exactly like how my confidence level was before I was impacted by this world. I won't put a blame on anyone, but just how life just taught me how to be in this world. And another thing that I learned about studying the emotion the emotion frustration is, once I felt like I was going to be rejected by someone or something, that's when I would completely shut down. So just understanding overall what was the main consensus center around me being triggered to being frustrated. So, like I said, if I felt like I was going to be rejected by a boss, a friend, a family member, it doesn't matter what it is. If I felt like I was going to be rejected, I wouldn't do it. And I would just self-sabotage myself. And this was so powerful when it came to mine was the brain is a powerful tool, but it also can hurt you in the sense of how you think. So if you're thinking negatively, you're only going to get negative reactions or outcomes. And I just had to switch it. And not every day is easy, but I have to tell myself that you are better than this. You are better than the negative thoughts that you experience. Like, allow your brain to work for you, not against you. And frustration can stop a lot of people from living out in their full potential because they're always second guessing themselves. And some external sources that can lead to frustration is the condition you encounter outside yourself that are the sources of frustration. Examples are people, places, and things that serve as roadblocks to getting what you want done. And in my notes, I put AKA people pleasing and the fear of being judged. Those two were the biggest things that I allowed to hinder me. Hear what I said now. What I allowed to hinder me. Those people, places, and things do not determine what it is that I get out of life. I determine that. But I allowed those things to hinder me from succeeding in what it is that I wanted to do. Okay, granted, you didn't get the job. All right, cool. What are you going to do? You're going to go back to school to learn another skill? No. All right, then apply for another job. Everyone is not going to say yes to you. You're going to get probably 1,001 no's, but on that 1,002 no, you might get a yes. And if not, you continue to go on. And like I said before, I allowed those no's and whatever it is, and that fear of being rejected, I allowed it to control how I saw myself. And I had to take back that power to say, no, this no longer will hinder me from moving forward and whatever it is that I wanted to do. Whether that's a career, managing my emotions, a relationship, and not just like with a partner, but platonic relationships as well. And a saying that I used to say when I was younger, but I don't know why I didn't let this really like marinate in my brain and use it, is they judge Jesus, so they're definitely going to judge you. Who are you? You are nobody. I wouldn't say special, but at the end of it all, you're no one special. And you don't get opted out from being judged. People are going to judge you. And the reason why people are judging, including myself, is because I'm judging myself. They are ultimately judging themselves, and so they're projecting that perceived judgment onto you. So once we all stop doing that, this world will be 10 times better. So controlling our emotions and stop judging others, this world will be basically a perfect utopia. But we can't stop doing that because we have so much anger and animosity towards ourselves or life or the things around us that we cannot step outside of our ego to say, here, I need to heal from X, Y, and Z, whatever it is, so I can be a better person, so I can show up as a better person in this world, so this world can be better. Another external factor for frustration is wasted time. I've heard from so many people, including myself, we all say this, but I wasted so much time doing that. The reason why people stay in relationships or at a job or this, that, and the third is because of perceived wasted time. If you perceive that you've wasted your time, then that's exactly what it is. You wasted your time. But if you look at it as, well, I did this and I didn't get the desired outcome that I was expecting, but I learned something from it. That's what I needed to take from all the things that I've experienced in the past. Is just because it didn't go the way that I wanted it to go, I still learned something from it. And that even includes my childhood, because I've always looked at it as me being the victim rather than me looking at it as I don't want to be that way. So how is it that I can go about my life not being that way? How can I improve, myself, so I wouldn't show up as an angry, bitter person? So stop looking at it as you wasted your time, because we all have to learn something. So how does frustration make a person feel? It can make a person angry. That person probably more likely tends to give up or quit. That was me all the way. Last year, I decided that I wanted to write a book about food content. And of course, that little man in the back of my head, that just negative little man, he was saying, "You are a failure. You cannot do this. You don't know anything about this." And I'm just, now that I think about it, it's like, yes, I do, because I have the internet, my good sir, And I'm talking like this is a person, but these are just thoughts in my head or whatever. But I have the internet. I can learn whatever it is that I need to learn in order for me to do whatever it is that I need to do. But I didn't look at it like that. I looked at it as, yeah, you're right, I'm a failure, so I'm just going to give up. And I quit that project and started doing something else. And that has been a constant cycle, a pattern in my life. Whenever I would start, because I have 1,001 ideas. They come to me every single day. It's just like idea on top of the idea. And what stops me from completing that idea is me not believing in myself, and that whole I'm a failure. And that's why it was so important for me to continue with this podcast, is because it was to teach me that I'm not a failure and that I can do whatever it is that I put my mind up to. I just have to be consistent and stay focused. Also, frustration makes a person feel have low self-esteem or a loss of confidence. And another feeling that a person may feel when frustrated is stress. Stress is so detrimental to your health, your mental health, your physical health, your spiritual health, all the health that you could think of, your well-being in general. It affects it. Whenever a person is under constant stress, that increases your blood pressure, your heart rate. You're not able to properly process information, so you can get yourself out of a situation. And not all stress is bad stress, because stress can help you fight whenever you're in a situation to where you would have to fight. But if you're constantly under stress in a negative way and it doesn't produce the desired outcome, it will lead to you being mentally and physically sick. And that was something that I started to experience approximately like 2 years ago. High blood pressure runs in my family. But the way that I was treating myself, I was just being so negative and hard on myself and not giving myself the grace and the compassion and the love that I needed, that I wouldn't say I developed high blood pressure, but my blood pressure started to get higher and higher. I want to say the highest that it ever got was 160 over 100 and something. And that is on the verge of having a stroke. You hear me? Having a stroke. And being 28 to 30 and having a stroke due to stress alone, you know how absurd that is, because that is something that I can control. And therefore, I had to learn to better manage my emotions in order so I wouldn't put myself under those physical restraints, essentially harming myself. And that person often feels sad, uncertain, depressed, or anxious. They tend to turn to substance abuse to cope with whatever obstacle or unresolved emotion. And they engage in other negative and self-destructive behaviors, aka me at one point in time. So what are some ways that we can better manage stress? Number one is recognizing the patterns. Like I said before, whenever I would get frustrated, I would just shut down. So I had to teach myself to no longer shut down, allow myself to experience whatever emotion it is. Make a list of the people, places, and things that frustrate you. Also, knowing when and where you get frustrated is important when formulating a strategy for removing or coping with the sources of frustration in a safe and effective manner. So what are some things that can lead to frustration is a loss of job, losing a promotion, emotional difficulties, your health, physical and medical conditions, and finances. Those are just a few listed. And the thing that I realized about frustration and the patterns is once I wrote down my list, or once I thought about it, really internalized what it is that I was frustrated about, asking myself, what is it that I could control? So if I'm overspending, all right, how can I cut back on my spending habits so I could have more money to save or do this or that? I had to really sit down and ask myself, I didn't know how to manage my emotions, so I started therapy. And one of my therapy outlets is doing this podcast and doing videos and creating content about managing emotions and things in that order. So ways to cope with frustration is breathing exercises. Breathing exercises are so important because it allows us to get the oxygen that we need to send up to our brain so we can effectively process whatever it is that we need to process. Meditation. When I started meditating, I would simply just cry. I felt like that was the only thing that I could do in that time, in that quiet time, because I just felt like I was so overwhelmed with emotions and thoughts that I didn't know exactly how to place them. So I would just cry. But as time went on, I would actually get into guided meditation because I couldn't sit with my thoughts alone. So once I was able to do them, I was able to better display my emotions as well as communicate. The next one is communication, ironically. And if I was frustrated with a person, I would communicate to them exactly what it is that was bothering me, but after I had calmed down emotionally, because you don't want to walk in a situation where you're emotionally fired up. Angry, frustrated, of course, just enraged to where you would just say something that you didn't mean and say something that you just would ultimately regret. Physical exercise is a great one because it gets the heart rate pumping, hence, getting that oxygen you need to your organs so you can feel better. And most importantly for me, because I didn't know how to manage my emotions, was therapy and going out and just talking with someone that was outside of my family or friends that didn't even know me, that couldn't form a biased opinion about me, and just sharing with them my thoughts and how it is that I was showing up in this world and the things that I wanted to change. So I hope this helped you all out. Like always, I love you so much, and I hope go out and do the work that you need so you won't be controlled by frustration again. Have a good one.